Have you ever wondered what happens to the crew inside a tank after it's hit, and sometimes even destroyed? Where do the strong men go after the explosion turns metal into fire, and the turret flies sky high? You might think you already know, but the truth is far more terrifying. Subscribe for more bone-chilling military stories like these, where we show nothing but brutal reality. Birth of the T-72. The T-72 wasn't built to be the world's best tank. Rather, its construction is far more underwhelming than the amount of praise it receives. So far, it has been designed to be sufficient for large numbers. In the 1960s, Soviet tank design was still guided by lessons from World War II. The Red Army had learned that victory could be achieved through mass production, even if the quality of the individual tanks was inferior. Not only would they inflict a lot of mental pain, but also physical damage due to the numbers. Thousands of T-34s overwhelmed the Germans, not because they were perfect, but because there were just too many of them. So, here's where things got interesting. When the Cold War began, the same idea evolved into the T-64, a revolutionary tank for its time. It not only had some of the most advanced armor, a smoothbore 125mm gun, but also an outloader that replaced a human loader completely. This reduced the crew from 4 to 3, but the brutal reality they faced after being hit was something that we're yet to cover. So keep watching. The T-64 was deadlier, faster, and smaller, at least on paper. However, it was also complicated and highly unreliable due to its mechanical failures. Soviet engineers decided to create something relatively simple. This version would be produced by the thousands and maintained by the average soldiers, not just the elite units. This became the T-72, a tank designed to fill the battlefield in the event of an all-out war with NATO. This tank had the same 125mm gun, the same autoloader, and a rugged V12 diesel engine, producing a whopping 780 horsepower. But the real benefit was its quantity. To understand what happens to the crew after a hit, you must know how they actually fit inside the T-72. But before we uncover what grim horrors waited for the crew members, we've got something exciting of our own. A $300 Amazon gift card giveaway to celebrate hitting 1,000 subscribers. All you need to do is subscribe and drop a comment below so we can add you to the raffle. Think of it as your chance to unearth a little treasure of your own, while helping us keep the hunt for history's hidden stories alive. Mechanics of the T-72. Here are the basics. The T-72 contains 3 crew members. There's the commander and the gunner in the turret. The driver is in the front hull. So, by removing the human loader, this design saved some space, allowing it to be shorter, smaller, and much more explosive. But due to its smaller size, it was harder to hit. So far, you might be thinking that the Soviet engineers had discovered something so overpowered back in the days, but there comes a problem. Below the turret floor, there's a rotating ammunition carousel that stores 22 rounds of 125mm shells. Each shell and its propellant charge exploded, sitting right under the crew's feet. So, the autoloader mechanically lifts them into the breach before firing. It was a brilliant idea for efficiency, but overall, a nightmare for survival that they failed to see. Whenever the tank was and that carousel was ignited, there came the infamous jack-in-the-box effect. The explosion of the ammunition generated a massive pressure wave that destroyed the turret, cleaned off the hull, sending it dozens of meters into the air, along with everything inside. In those few milliseconds of wait, there is literally no time to escape or a chance to react. The crew was either instantly vaporized or torn apart by the shrapnel, fire, and even the shockwaves. Western tanks, such as the M1 Abrams or Leopard 2, store ammunition behind a blast-proof panel that vents explosions outward, giving the crew a better chance to survive. But the T-722, however, kept most of its ammunition around and below the crew. With one hit in the wrong place, the tank became a steel coffin, and it was more common than you think. Now, let's see the crew's perspective and the hell that they were experiencing. The T-72's interior was extremely cramped thanks to its compact side. The gunner and commander are squeezed shoulder to shoulder, surrounded by different things like breech, optics, and ammunition. Their visibility is poor, especially the commanders, who relies mostly on small periscopes. But what about the accidents? Well, they weren't uncommon. Many Soviet and later Russian veterans recalled painful incidents of autoloaders malfunctioning and biting crew members, literally catching arms or legs during the reload cycles. While the gunner's role was to aim and fire the 125mm main gun and coaxial machine gun, the commander operated the heavy DSK machine gun while also coordinating with other tanks. They sat inches away from the propellant charges, which were a silent, ticking danger in every single fight. The driver up front is slightly better. His position was much more spacious and somewhat separated from the ammunition storage. But in some rare cases, drivers survived hits that destroyed the turret entirely. But even then, the overpressure, smoke, and conditions inside the hull made survival almost non-existent. The biggest design flaw of almost every T-72, which the veteran complained about, was the reverse speed. These tanks would only retreat at about 5 kilometers per hour, or 3 miles. In combat, that meant once you were exposed and needed to retreat, you simply weren't fast enough. Due to the inferior speed, many 72s died this way. They were caught in ambushes with no room to back out whatsoever. Imagine being a fighter in those times. The sheer pressure is enough to break you. However, the T-72's insides were even more suffocating with the overwhelming amount of pressure that you got all the time. But then, having no options to retreat meant that most of the Soviet soldiers were dead meat running through the battlefields. First blood, Lebanon, and the Middle East. The T-72's combat debut came in the early 1980s during the Lebanese conflict. Syrian forces were newly equipped with the T-72s, and they faced off against the Israeli Merkavas. According to the reports in history, we see that these tanks managed to destroy several Israeli tanks. The sheer number was enough to alert even NATO, which began upgrading to 120mm guns soon after. But it wasn't the Iran-Iraq war that the T-72 truly proved its worth. Iraq's army was backed by hundreds of Soviet-supplied T-72Ms that went head-to-head with Iran's older Western tanks like the M60 Patton and British Chieftains. The T-72s dominated the initial battles because the world was unprepared to combat them, but something dark was waiting for these soldiers already. Still, we cannot take away anything from the T-72 because it shredded the enemy armor with ease. In open desert warfare, they were feared machines, fast, powerful, and brutal. But this war also revealed the dark side of these tanks. In towns or melee, Iranian RPG teams discovered their weaknesses: thin side and rear armor. There was also the vulnerable top, and of course, the bad ammunition layout. It wasn't so long till the world already knew about the weak points, and with one well-placed hit, it would set off a chain reaction, destroying the entire tank, and its crew would be burned in a fiery instant. However, if the Iran-Iraq War demonstrated the true power of the T-72, you would be surprised to know what happened in 1991, as that was a complete disaster and exposed all the fatal flaws. By then, Iraq fielded a large number of the T-72s, but they were the export models. Basically, the downgraded versions have weaker armor and fire control. So when the US-led coalition launched Operation Desert Storm, Iraqi tankers were waiting. They were confident, dug in, and knew they could hold their ground. Then came the night battles. In a sandstorm, the US Abrams and Bradley crew started using advanced thermal sights and night vision. They engaged Iraqi armor from distances where the poor fellas couldn't see them. The results? It was heavily one-sided. Around 150 T-72s were destroyed, without a single Abrams being lost in return. This is what happens when you have the right strategy against the right enemy. Coalition tank rounds pierced Iraqi tanks, igniting ammunition and throwing turrets skywards. The crews that were inside never even stood a chance, let alone survive for a moment. The myth of the T-72's invincibility was long gone now. From that point on, the tank's reputation dropped, and it was always linked to that one desert massacre fight that we just talked about. Urban hell, Grozny. Then came the urban hell in the shape of the First Chechen War. When the T-72s and T-82s rolled into Grozny in 1994, they expected a relatively easy victory. But what they got instead was something so dark that generations would remember. Columns of tanks entered the city streets in parade formation without any proper infantry support. Chechen fighters were armed with RPGs and pure determination. They ambushed apartment blocks and basements. Rear tanks were destroyed first while trapping the rest. RPGs rained from all angles, sides, rooftops, and even basements. They were hitting the tanks where they were weakest, and due to the flawed designs, the crews couldn't elevate their guns enough to fight back. Within minutes, entire platoons were burning. The city even earned the grim nickname of the Tank Cemetery. Surviving crew members told everyone that they saw fellow tanks erupting in towering fireballs with their turrets spinning in the air. The jack-in-the-box effect was back again, and it was harder than ever. In a single day, 20 out of 26 T-72s were annihilated, while only a few inside survived. This battle became a textbook lesson on what not to do with tanks in urban warfare. However, tragically, that lesson would be repeatedly ignored in later conflicts, the Yugoslav Wars. Then it was 1991 when Yugoslavia broke up. Their locally produced T-72 variants, known as the M84s, rolled into Croatia. During the battle for Vukovar, a tank column entered a narrow street called Trenska Street, expecting an easy sweep. However, the Croatian fighters had other plans. They let the tanks roll in and then ambushed them with RPG-7s from close range. The lead and rear tanks were destroyed instantly, blocking the exit and trapping the rest inside a narrow death trap. Within minutes, dozens of those tanks were burning, and the streets would later be known as the Cemetery of Tanks. The pattern had always been the same. Once the ammunition inside was hit, the explosion imploded inside the vehicle, and the crews had no time to react, with no way to escape. This was the grim reality that they were facing. These ambuses showed that even the bravest, most skilled T-72 crew could be helpless if the RPG was set in the right place. Today, fast forward to today, and the T-72 is still fighting itself. This is half a century after it was designed, but the modern battlefield is nothing like the one it was built for. Drones are now hovering overhead, armed with precisely guided explosives. No tank for the Cold War era, not even the latest Western ones, were designed for this kind of war. But thanks to the T-72's thick top and vulnerable ammo storage, it is an easy target for most of the modern-day tanks. Videos from the ongoing conflict in Ukraine show dozens of T-72s meeting their demise. One hit is equal to one explosion with the turret gone. Some Russian crews have tried adding cope cages with makeshift metal roofs to stop the attack and drones, but the results are still mixed. The result? T-72 is basically a death machine for anyone inside. There was a time when it was glorious, but it fell off after the world got to know how gimmicky it was. Do you think the T-72 would survive an all-out battle today? Let us know in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel if you enjoyed the video.